Hey everybody, how you doing? It's Ken Pooch Van Druten here again. We have Chris Rabold with us for our second talk here. You know, if you didn't watch the video before this, I've decided that I want to do a bunch of these videos where maybe Chris and I kind of push off of each other and talk about different things. You know, both of us are good friends and we talk to each other a lot on the phone, and we have conversations like this all the time talking about audio because we love audio. And I thought that it might be interesting for you guys to be kind of the fly on the wall during that discussion. So this is our second video. The first one we were talking specifically about drum microphones, and we got off on a little bit of a tangent on some bussing and placement on the console and all that kind of stuff as we do. But I thought, you know, at the end of that video, we started talking a little bit about how both you and I use triggers. Speak to that a little bit. Like, Chris, how do you use triggers on the drums?
Yeah, I started doing that 20 years ago. And like most things that all of us do, you know, I learned it somewhere. I remember this particular method I read about. And man, I would love to be like a 18, 19, 20-year-old mixer now, because the wealth of knowledge, actually it might suck because it's almost overwhelming. You know what I mean?
Oh, man.
But I remember there's so much, and I get stuck in those same, you know, learning dives. So I'm just like, oh my God, my brain can't take it. So about 20 years ago, I read an article about someone doing, it's very simple. The way I did it in the past, when it was analog, I started with these. I specifically use shell mounted triggers. Now, they're not, if you really want to get down to the nanosecond, there is the fastest response you're going to get is going to be from a trigger placed directly on the head. For the strike of the drum to happen, the shell to resonate, and particularly depending on where that is, there's a little more time in there. That being said, it works great for me. My feeling on, and I actually thought about this early on, I don't remember what I read about initially, how they were doing it, is I don't want to do anything that's going to affect the tuning. So I don't want to put anything on the head unless you're triggering. There is no acoustic sound, which I've never done. But if you're simply triggering sounds, you could dampen the head all you want. Doesn't matter. So I try to stick with shell mounted triggers. A long time ago, I started with these Fishman. Fishman made these shell mounted triggers. They were small, had a super thin little line. I don't know if you remember those.
I do.
They would break often. I used those. I'd run them down the analog snake with everything was running down an analog snake, and they would just go simply analog into the key inputs on all of the gates, which for me back in the day were either, like most people, were either Drummer 201s or Aphex 612s or 622s.
That's it.
You know, maybe you used an IntelliGate, you know, maybe you used some BSS stuff, but that was kind of it. So then and it's just simply that they go, and I can tell you how I do it digitally, but it's just that they go into the side chain. So if anybody who hasn't done this before, the gate is now opening not by the amplitude produced and received by the microphone. The gate is now opening when it when it receives signal from the trigger. That trigger, go ahead.
I just want everyone to be clear that we are talking specifically about using triggers to open the threshold of the gate of an acoustic sound. We're not triggering sounds here. We're talking about triggering the opening of the individual gate on the particular tom. That tom is still mic'd with something else, whatever, you know, for me, it's a 4099. For you, it's a 98. And so all we're doing is using those triggers to key the threshold opening of that gate. I just wanted to point that out as we get discussing this more. Go ahead.
Which is very important to point out there, so people actually know what I'm talking about here as I get going. So one thing that's cool now, what you'll find is your thresholds will inherently lower when this happens, because as we know, we've all gotten that really bad sound in live sound where the toms are going hit because they're opening with cymbal hits, or obviously the biggest offender is a snare.
Right.
That's nearby. You will get to a point with a trigger where since it's reacting to the resonance of the shell, if you drop the threshold low enough, I mean, that shell's sitting there going, and it'll still open to other ones. But one thing that's neat, it'll still open to the occasional, or one drum just might be more. You'll find that one that for whatever reason has a higher threshold. Nowadays,
I find real quick, I find that the placement of the trigger on those particular toms makes a huge difference. So for instance, if you have two toms that are next to each other, I don't place the triggers on the shell close to the toms. Do you understand? They're on the outside of those toms. If there's no other toms around them, I make the trigger be the furthest away from other things to, send an impulse down that trigger line. So I actually think a lot about where I'm placing those triggers. It's not just something random, for me, I place them kind of like halfway down a shell, but away from everything else as much as I can. Where do you place them?
Same, and ultimately it is a transducer. If there is a sound, it is an acoustic source itself. So if there is a sound next to it, and in fact, when you cue them up, you will hear clear audio. There's the cack sound of the trigger, but as you know, you'll clearly hear audio there as well. I too do that exact same thing that you said. Plus, if you think about it, the center of the drum is where the drum is going to be most pliable. So that's where vibration is going to be. It's going to be most susceptible to vibrate, to give me that sound. And I think it's important to mention to anyone listening too that that we're saying toms. Ultimately, I will put these on every drum up there. I will sometimes turn them off on things like kick and snare, if, to be honest with you, it's just working better for whatever. Those two at times will work better without them. But one thing I wanted to say is nowadays, and these two I see have become the de facto standard in the industry, the Pentec RS5.
Yeah.
They're inexpensive. They're pretty damn tough. Those seem to be what most folks are using now. They have a little 1/4 inch output, so you just got to have, they just got to be turned on this and that. But now, in the past, on the analog snake, they would just run right down the snake, right into the unit. Now, at least the way I do it, I don't, they run. It has to run. It runs down the digital snake. It's part of my input list, the fiber, whatever it is, and then I hit channels with them. And I'll do that so that I have consistent levels across all of them. In other words, that the levels are hitting at the same spot on all of the gates, so that I do that because I'm anal. I like to see a lot of my thresholds be in relatively the same place. One way that it also works in your favor is you could actually, let's say they're all coming in at -10 on their own. Every time they hit a tom, the trigger goes to -10. I could actually gain those down to -20, which means now my threshold on my gate is going to be, I can lower it as well. So that's when you get into the reason that, for anybody listening, what's the point? The point is you get lower thresholds. Ghost notes come through, which I don't know how many of you guys actually have ghost notes, but it's just, and then that snare's not powering it. So you can manipulate it. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. Let me give some clarity though. So the actual triggers are transducers themselves that end up in a 1/4 inch female. Okay. So then you have to make a cable that goes 1/4 inch male to an XLR male that you would then plug into your stage cable that goes to your stage rack. And so you are treating them as they are analog inputs, just as you would with toms. So for instance, for Iron Maiden, there are 9 toms. And by the way, if I didn't use triggers with Iron Maiden, there's no way that I would survive. 9 open tom microphones. You can't, right? But there's 9 toms. That means that there's 9 microphones and 9 inputs of triggers. So it's 18 inputs of toms, which sounds like a lot. And especially for a band that's only 56 inputs, 18 of those are toms.
It's tough to talk the whole crew as a whole. You might be the only guy using those triggers.
That's true.
We got to plug Chris's triggers in. I'm like, yeah, you do.
What's funny though is I've drug monitor engineers along with me. Tater now uses them in Monitor World.
Once they get into it, you can't. The argument against it, I don't know that there is one.
There isn't. And
it's important important to note what we're saying. Like I say, I take it to a channel, and I then manipulate the channel. You then on the gate on the actual source choose that channel I just mentioned as your key source. So that's how you. Anyway, just to make clear.
No, that's great. And in my last video I did about the way that I do my console in Iron Maiden, I kind of showed that routing so that if you're a little bit confused by that, just go back to that video and I show exactly where the routing comes from. Now, another clarity I wanted to make is that part of the reason that I do the same thing that you do, which is make every trigger be the same, where they're all exactly -10, for instance, is it helps you to see day to day whether a trigger has died or not, or it's acting weird, or maybe it's you can look at it even without listening to that trigger. You can say, wow, something's wacky with that trigger today. And so the whole threshold thing is really important too. And that is, I don't know, that's kind of more of an advanced concept in the sense that you're talking about adjusting the thresholds versus the other instruments that are around it. But if you understand that, that is the reason that we're kind of adjusting the gain, the overall gain of the acoustic transducer. Right. And so I just wanted to point that out, that there's two reasons why we make them all the same.
Right. And that point, and we could do this now or later at another point, that speaks to gain structure as a whole and the importance of, here we go, tangent time. That's the importance of when I see guys who there is how do you even line check if you don't have a ref? Like, I don't understand it. Like, you've got to, we're tracking and mixing and mastering every day. So if your mix that you have dialed in, you need to have a standard reference. Yeah. And whether that's it should be a numerical reference or somewhere I know when it hits yellow, it's got to be something. And mine are different for all different types of inputs, whole other conversation. But that's why having standards, and that's when you go, hey, it's different today, and the tech says, no, it's not. I didn't do anything different. It's like, I'm not saying you did. I'm just telling you.
Saying there's something different. I know.
It's different. Yeah. And that's a good same thing with, and that's why mic placement is so important too.
Oh yeah, totally. And we're gonna get there in a second.
Cool.
It's funny that you say that, because I totally am so anal about
oh man.
Okay, so two things. I know we're kind of off on a tangent. I don't know if this is ego or not, but I almost, if I'm sharing a stage rack with someone, I'm the guy. I want control of the mic pre's.
Man.
And the reason, but wait, the reason is, and then the way that I sell it to a monitor engineer is this. I am so anal about that input being exactly the same every day, sound-wise and meter-wise. Like, I go to weird extremes even. Like, the Digico meters are amazing. They're awesome plasma meters.
Meter bridge out.
Absolutely. But you know what's weird is I often look at the meter bridge of Reaper as my real go-to. It's often it's right here next to me. I don't have to I'm getting old. I can't see shit. But
I hear you.
Right here next to me is the record screen with the Reaper meter bridge with really good meters as well. Their meters are really good too. And I can literally tell if a microphone's not placed properly.
Yeah.
Even if it's off by like an inch, or half an inch, I can look at it and be like, something's up with that, and then makes me go up on the stage. So that's a whole other rabbit hole. But
it matters, and that's what this is for too, is for us to do this. Not to make it incredibly long. My sort of I have targets on the Digico or whatever the console might be. But my sort of next level, I'll do this thing where I'll go through during a tour and I'll be like, all right, let's look at what every group of instruments is doing. And what I mean by that is, what is their peak level? So I'll solo the drums VCA and I'll watch and I'll say, as a whole, it is, because there's peak, obviously there's peak level and there's RMS. I know we're getting into some topics here, but I think this is super important. Peak is the truth. Peak,
Right.
you can clip. RMS is free, baby. Like the louder that is, that's how you'll find signals with a lower peak, but the RMS is higher that sound twice as loud. So, but peak is kind of your truth because you can't clip. I realize you can within the digital platform. Let's just pretend we all know clipping is bad. So I'll solo, for instance, the drums VCA and see -5. Then I'll solo the bass VCA and look, and I can give you. I'm looking at a piece of paper right somewhere in this notebook here. I have it written down from when I did this recently. There's usually, I'll go through the guitars, the horns, the keys, the vocals, this and that. Drums usually peak 5 dB louder than all sustain sources. My bass is usually a little higher. By doing that, what I'm getting with it, where I'm going with that is I'll look at paths in waves, which has been around forever, you know, and I'll look at the peak level on there. I'll note it. And man, it's the same every tour. It's just the way I mix. So not only is that a fun little, fun fact, look at my gain, it also tells me how I can set my gain structure to start. And that doesn't mean every input has like, it's all over the place, but I have very standardized things, like things with strong transients hit at, we'll say -10. Things with more sustain typically land, I go back and forth anywhere between 5 dB below that and 10 dB below that. Because I know once I get through with my process, the end result is going to be the drums are going to be hitting about 5 dB louder on peak. Peak though, that's what's important.
No,
anyway,
I get it.
Yeah. So pad is fine to look at. I'm a dork about it.
You're more anal than I am, dude. Paz is like that's way down a rabbit hole, but way to go. That's cool.
But it goes back to what I was saying about laying out the desk. Like, yeah, that's sort of like having that knowledge base of where do I want to see things hit is also so that I can be lazy. So that like when I do, or I can be efficient. So when I dial, just being honest, if I have to dial up a mix quick, I'm not just guessing on my input gains. Like I know if they hit in these certain things, and for me, it's like drums, tracks, and often bass will hit at say -10. Some guys might say -20, whatever. I say -10. And then from there, I can scale my others so that when I move the faders up, when I push those faders up, I'm in a starting spot that's realistic. Anyway, so that's why
that's really interesting because we are very similar in that sense. You know, I can look at things without even listening to them and tell you whether it's correct or not and whether it's going to work in my mix. Simply because we both have this workflow that we've used for years and years and years. And you know, you'll see something and be like, you know, something's funky with that. I know there's something wrong. And not even listening to it, like just looking at a meter or looking at something and saying, you know, that's weird. And I think that's an important skill that you should develop. Like it's a skill that you should have as part of your own arsenal as a mixer is recognizing. You know, I've watched opening act guys where I know something's wrong. I'm listening to something coming out of the PA and go, okay, I know that something's up with that kick drum, whatever. And I'll walk over to the console and I'll look and I know right away, like what's wrong, but they don't have that skill. Like they look at it and they know something's wrong. Like they hear it, but they don't know where to look for it or how to fix it. I think it's something that you should try to develop over time. I'm not really sure how you train people for that. You know, that's always a hard thing. I think
you just develop your own set of standards. I think that's it. I mean, and I learned the whole notion of like really using meters. I don't want to say creatively, but more like analytically. I remember I heard this I can't remember what Southern rock band this guy mixed. I remember who it was. I remember the conversation, him talking about it. He's like, yeah, I could walk up to PM 3000 at line check and just see. And he was talking about on a VU meter, which is a whole other type of learning. Yeah. Like a kick drum hits at like -20, but the peak is at like +14, you know, anyway. But I remember hearing him, I remember I was young and I remember hearing him say that. And I was like, hell yeah, I need to learn how to do that too.
Cool.
You know, and it's paid huge dividends.
Yeah,
you know?
It sure has. Me too. That's a skill that you should work on. I want to kind of rein us back just a little bit because the first part of these first two videos, I promised that we were going to talk about mic choices and mic placement. So, and not just on drums. I say this all the time. Listen, everything that I do, I learned from somebody else. Like, I'm not smart enough to like make stuff up, right? So especially when it comes to mic placement, the way that I place my microphones is because I watched somebody else do it and either succeed at it or suck at it. And so, and you know, the sucky way I went, I'm never doing that, man. That's a really stupid. But the way that I learned that mic placement was super important was by, you know, I was a studio guy as you were. And so I got to be an assistant engineer behind some of the biggest names producers, you know, in Los Angeles. And I used to be an assistant for Bruce Van Druten, and he would literally take an entire day getting sounds in front of bass guitars and guitars in general. He would put me out in the control room or out in the studio. He would be in the control room with me with a pair of headphones, and he would say, you know, take that microphone, move it a half inch to the left in the intercom. He would say, you know, move it to the left, and I would move it, and he'd say, stop. And then he would listen for like 5 minutes. And then he would say, okay, move it back to the right, just about, you know, half of what you did, you know? And we would sit there with a microphone, like moving it around the cone of a guitar or a bass, literally for a day. And, you know, those were the days in the 90s when, you know, they were just hemorrhaging money in studios. So they were spending, you know, millions of dollars and could have all the time in the world to do stuff. But what I learned from that was how important moving a microphone a half an inch makes a difference and where you do it. So from your perspective, like, where did you learn that, and how do you do placement, and speak to some of that?
Well, I, like you, everything that I've, for the most part, I've read, seen, but ultimately tried, you know, it's all been from experimentation. And I can tell you a ton of research over the years, reading about classic records or this and that, or from live engineers that I respect and how they would get their sounds or how you get that particular sound. A lot of that, but of course, like everything, it's just trial and error. Where there was a time when I worked for one single band for a long time, which is Widespread Panic. People hear me reference them all the time, but it was great. It was in my hometown of Athens, Georgia. I would go to the warehouse, set up a kit, and literally take a mic, and I would do it, and I would just label it as such. I'd do it 45 at the center at 3 fingers.
Nice.
I'd do it flat. I do all these different things, and it would just be, and I'm not any killer drummer. I'm literally just striking the drums. And I would do stuff like that. And back in the day, I don't even know if I was doing that with a DAW. I mean, I think that might have even been to like DA, whatever, 8s or something.
yeah,
whatever it was. And then as time went on, then I had access to it. So that was really big for me. But really just trial and error. And a lot of times you can be influenced that a certain mic technique is great when it actually was just the source. Like, I've had great vocalists, for example, that I couldn't tell you what mic I like on them, because even though there's a phenomenal vocal coming out, there's no microphone near it, you know? And at the same time, any microphone near that phenomenal vocal output would probably sound great. And the same thing's true. So I have when you asked me on the last one what my favorite kit was, and I thought of this one drum sound, man, I could have put anything near that snare and it would sound amazing, you know?
That's true.
For me now. Yeah.
But it does matter. It does matter where you point at things.
Greatly.
Right?
Greatly. But just that kind of sort of comes back full circle to ultimately it's the source. What I do, though, is very systematic. Like you were saying, I check the drums. I don't often place them. Talk about another person you've got to have a really close relationship with, whoever's putting the mics up there. I let them know what I like to see. I let them know where I want it to clip, how I want it to clip, or what to stand, which I don't like. I don't want a LP claw on a stand, because when you move the stand, we have to get it. We got to be on the same page. Right. Then I'll go up there and check it 3 or 4 times a day, you know? So for me, I'll just start and I'll go quickly through them. The 91's kind of a no-brainer. We all kind of know where that's going. If you're using just one, like most folks, it's just right in the middle. Might be on one of those Kelly shoe things that raises it up.
Yeah.
You know, I am careful with those. Don't just sling it in there, because you'll look and it'll be sideways. And if they've got a big fluffy pillow, or the dude puts a blanket in, whichever way it came out of the case that day, like still be particular about it. For me,
I'm real quick, a 91, if you don't know, it's a boundary microphone, right? But the capsule of it sits in this end and it's pointed at a 45-degree angle. So if that microphone gets into a fluffy pillow like this and starts being pointed at the fluffy pillow instead of the beater part of a kick drum, you'll get a really poopy sounding kick drum. So, it is important. It's the way that the capsule is. It's basically, believe it or not, if you don't know this, it's a 98 capsule that's inside of a boundary microphone. So it's a little tiny capsule that's at 45 degrees inside of a boundary mic for you guys out there. Sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
And no, that's cool. And so then for that second mic, I mentioned in the other video, now I like to get in and a little, if this is the head of the drum, I'd say it's maybe a fist off, and it's off. It's somewhere between the center where the beater strikes and the shell. So the mic's somewhere over here. What I don't like is what everyone does in live sound is, there's a hole off to the side and you just put that mic in the hole. That a lot of times you're miking just the air pressure from that point. I don't like that sound. I do like a center cut hole in the head. It's just rare to find someone live that will allow you to do that.
I know, that's true.
You know what I mean? It's cool. So a lot of times I get it. I don't like miking over there for that second kick, but I will. Now, again, we start talking about the haphazard blanket pillow placement. Man, check that shit too, because if not, there's a pillow sticking. Like, what are you miking? You know what I mean?
I know. That's it.
So for that one, if that's what we're doing, everything's got to stay in the same place every day. That's all I know, wherever I put it, because of phase relationship.
Yeah.
And it's got to be the same. So quickly moving up to snares, you mentioned tight kits. That can throw all the rules off. If you can only get a snare straight between two, sometimes you just got to do what you can do. Totally. For me, I'll tell you right now, toms are usually 3 fingers above the head. Those are my fingers. It's all subjective and arbitrary to, just whatever. But snares are usually more like 2. But for me, snares, and I've gone around and around. I've done it straight across. I've done it from like way up. I've done it back where it gets a little brighter and this or that. It's kind of generic. This is the rim of the snare. It's coming in like that. It's usually about 2 fingers up, kind of pointing towards the center, more or less a little flatter than a 45-degree angle. Toms, hat's usually a fist above the hat, usually on the outside, wherever I can get it. For me, toms, the mic is just over maybe an inch or 2 into, and it's 3 fingers. And I'm very systematic about that. The ride, we will measure daily to come up with it. And I am absolutely that guy for the overheads. So you're that
guy. You're the guy that gets the tape measure out. Okay, cool.
I am. I get made fun of all the time for it, but I could not care less because it's effective. So
it matters. It matters.
It matters. Now, if you're just doing an assembly thing, just put the mics wherever you want them, near the cluster of cymbals. Then we're going to get into a really advanced topic, which would be how do you deal then with the snare offset there. I won't go there, but I will tell you what I do is I split the difference between thinking of picking up the optimal cymbal, per mic sound versus the overall kit sound. And most importantly, that super loud snare. So I find a plane it's usually if you're looking at a snare drum, it would be almost like the 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock lug. It's the plane of the kick and the snare. And I go equidistant to those mics. And it's usually anywhere from 38 to 43 inches. And I just do that. So again, so that I can comment daily when I go, no, something's wrong. No, something's not right. I know all of because there's just so many variables, and once the people you work with know, he's serious and he's a stickler about this, then they're on board. They're on board with it, and they know he's not full of shit.
I hear you. And, you have to prove yourself to your techs too, right? Like you have to say, well, come and listen, it really makes a difference. It's interesting, I kind of do the same thing you're talking about, but I do it a little bit electronically. I place my overheads so that they're kind of the best optimum for cymbal use.
And then you move them digitally?
Yes. So that's
smart. I've never even thought of doing that.
So I do that. And then I also listen to panning. My overheads are almost never all the way panned. I bring pans in. I bring pans in to make the snare drum be in the center. You understand? So like I'm soloing up my overheads, those two microphones, and I adjust my pans. And sometimes it'll end up where my left one's at 9 and my right one's at 5:30, whatever it is, to make it to where that snare drum is right dead center. So it's sharing that space.
I've even done 0 and like that.
Yes. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just banging snare sound and then it crashes up. Yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah. Totally. Cool, man. That's awesome. So we've talked about overheads. We talked about your placement of everything else. Just quickly, I mean, I have a lot of those same rules, 2 fingers here, whatever, fist here. But in general, my rule is the center of the capsule, whatever I'm using, should be, especially on drums, should be pointing at wherever that drum is being struck. So
I have that same rule.
I look at a drum kit. I'll walk up to a drum kit and look where the drummer is hitting particular toms, because often it's not dead center in the middle of that tom. Most times on a tom, he'll be hitting it, to the right of the dot, or if there's no dot, the top part of the head. And I have found kind of just in general, now it doesn't always work, of course, nothing is just in stone, but in general, if I take microphones and point them, especially at a snare drum, if I point them where they're striking that particular instrument, that's usually like the best starting point. For me.
Oh, I just thought of a point to make. For me, when I'm and also thinking about just the way, microphone technology, how they work, part of the reason I too ideally would like the microphone to be pointing where a stick, is hitting, but I'm also mindful of intended use of proximity effect. I don't ever do the mic that's touching. I don't do that, but I know, particularly if it's a drum that's kind of thin, I'm like, you know what, we're going to fake a little low in there, meaning I might increase that angle a bit and get it a little lower because I want that added fatness that comes from, and of course that's what you're going to get with that. But now all this being said, man, I see guys back in the day that would take EV 408s, the egg mic, turn them straight down. Here's the edge of the drum, straight down. They're
miking the edge of the drum at that point.
They're miking the edge of the drum, and somehow it would sound amazing. And then I'd do it, and I'd be like, "That's the worst sound I've ever heard in my life."
Well, that's just it. I mean, I wanted to do this with you, and we're going to do a bunch more of them because I want to point out to people that there's no wrong way in getting there, right? If you get there, then you've done your job, right? The guy with the 40-ounce beer doesn't give a crap about whether or not your tom mic is pointed where the stick is hitting the tom. But what he does care about is whether the drums sound good or not, right? So whatever it is, whatever it is that helps you to get there, then cool. I just wanted this to be 2 dudes talking about how we do it, and maybe you can adopt some of it and make it part of your thing.
And all of these, like you've mentioned, are just starting points. Things change. Like that looks different on different gigs. Totally. But by and large, I know that you're the same as me. That's where I start. And now I feel confident in those choices.
Cool.
You know what I mean? So, there was a time.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. At the time you didn't?
No, I was going to say, no, there was a time when when you mentioned, I can't remember if it was this video or the last one, man, I've tried every microphone under the sun that's reasonable on drum. I wasn't sure. I didn't know. Now I feel very confident in a lot of these choices, a lot of these positions, and I know I can get results with them.
Also something to point out too is that we do have kind of standards that we're always using, whatever. But if someone says to me that I respect, like for instance, you or Toby Francis calls me and says, "Hey dude, have you tried this microphone on guitars? You really should." Then I am totally open. Like I'm not that guy that's like, I only use this microphone. Oh, no. You know what I mean?
Oh, no. That is so short-sighted, and you are totally pigeonholing yourself.
always be learning. They're always making things manufacturers are always making better things. Materials get better, all those kind of things. So don't pigeonhole yourself. Have an arsenal and have tools that you have, but don't pigeon yourself. We're kind of coming to the end of this. We're getting, into the length of this real quick. How about guitars and basses? Where do you mic them?
Guitars for me is almost always the same. It is, if this is the dust cap, I'm just off of it. Now that's if it's a dynamic or a condenser. A lot of times with ribbons, I will go because it's slower if you use them. It's a slower transient response, typically a darker sound. I will go closer to on axis, directly on axis. Never for me do I go on axis with a dynamic or what. It can move a little bit, and every now and again you'll get this. We find this more and more now that everyone has a laptop and therefore is a producer. But guys that are, hey, where are you putting that mic? Like I've got one guy who's just insistent that it's at a 45. Yeah, that's fine. That's cool. But for me, I do that. I go up. That's where I start. I'll move either way, usually right up on it. Sometimes that fist back to, again, purposely lessen proximity effect. Bass, which is usually just, or do you want mics, or you're just talking placement now?
Just placement. Yeah.
Just placement, yeah. So DI, obviously, I make sure they plug it in. For the mic, it's rare that I do use bass mic, but I'll change how I use it a lot through the course of a tour. Sometimes I'll turn it off, and then other days I'll be like, I've got it. I only use the mic. And then the next day I'm like, how did that even work? So it's usually the same concept. I usually don't use mics with a lot of deep low end response. I'll use here's a weird one. It's the only time I ever spec this microphone. And it's because I saw a guy do it in 2000 and I thought it was cool. The sound he got. I'll use like a Beta 57A.
Okay.
That doesn't have, and it's just because I heard somebody use it with good results. Because the point is I don't want a lot of the sub. I want low end, but I don't want sub. I want that from the DI. And I'll do the same thing there, just off if there's a dust, unless it's some multi-speaker thing in which I just throw up my hands. But it's just a single cone that's doing full range. Same deal, right off the dust cap. What do you do?
So that's an interesting discussion. I want to come back to that real quick at the end of this. But for me, it's almost exactly the same. But the place that I start is splitting the dust cap. Here's the dust cap. So the actual microphone is just, between the speaker cone and the dust cap. So here's your microphone. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
That's where I start. And I actually prefer on guitars most of the time. I like the proximity effect. I want to get it as close as I can. In fact, if the guitarist is cool with it, sometimes I'll ask them if they'll let me take the grill off of the particular instrument that I'm miking. If it take the grill off, then you can even get, the 57 dynamic or whatever you're using in there even closer to where, the dust cap and the speaker.
Do you tape? I make sure there's tape. I still check it with a flashlight every day.
Me too.
But you have some marker, I'm assuming.
I have a marker, right? In general for whoever's setting that stuff up. They can place it there and get the stand all tightened and correctly to where that is. But I definitely come in behind them with a flashlight every single day and check it.
Yeah, which just goes back to this thing we're talking about of just consistency, repeatability, reliability, minimizing variables.
Yes. So one thing that I wanted to bring up here right at the end, and you kind of mentioned it just a little bit, was multiple speakers on the same source and you using multiple microphones. So for instance, a 4x12 guitar cabinet, do you mic two different speakers or do you always mic the same speaker with two microphones?
That's a tough one, man. It depends on who I'm working with. If I'm working with a guy, I know this dude doesn't know what it's loaded with. I'll go back. If it's like a Super G and this guy's, man, he knows exactly what he's doing. He's like, yeah, I've got Al Nico's in there and there's greenback 25s. So I'll be like, cool. Let's try both of them. Let's see. What do you think? And that also, aside from getting me where I need to be, those interactions are very good for morale. That's very good to let whoever you're working with know, I'm not playing around. I know you're not playing around. Let's do this collaboratively. collaboratively,
Yeah.
which is an important point. But anyway, so I'll just check. If they can know, I'll defer to their knowledge base and try it. If they don't know, I can't say that I often take the time to do all four. Okay. Sometimes I might put an ear to it. I might just start somewhere. So if the person is knowledgeable, yes, I will be mindful of if it's in like an ISO box, God forbid. I will tell you this, I'll choose inside the box more to try to get away from some of the weird reflections that might be on the outside and some of that woof that's there. But you clearly have a process here. What is it?
No, I don't really. But I will tell you, I will tell you, actually, the question that I was asking was a different question, but it's interesting that you went down that road.
Oh, okay.
The question that I was asking, and think about it as I'm talking, is miking two different speakers on the same source can get you all kinds of weird phasing issues. Two sources far away from each other on the same source. So say you mic this speaker and mic the fourth speaker of the 412. No. Doing that is a no-no, right? Like you don't do that, right?
Never. Okay. And in fact, the mics look like this.
Yeah.
Over top of one
I think most people know that, but I've watched a lot of people do that where they put two microphones on the, it's a 4x12 slant and they got 57 on one of the speakers and then a large diaphragm on the other speaker. And I always go, oh, you're encouraging all kinds of weird phase between those two microphones. Like, take this large diaphragm and move it over here,
Yeah. There is an argument if you were taking those mics and panning them hard,
yes,
that some of that difference would be
can help you. Yes, absolutely,
could help you.
But in general, when you're talking about, you're trying to capture the same source with two different kinds of microphones. So you're using a large diaphragm microphone and then a small diaphragm dynamic. Let's say you're trying to capture two different nuances of that tone. You don't want to put those on separate speakers. That was my point.
And I get it.
And then you're stopped right now. I guess our internet got weird for a second, but now you're back. You were like frozen.
Okay, cool. I heard a noise. I just played it. I just played through. Oh, good. Take a break.
Frozen.
This is exhausting.
It is. Yeah. No, but it's fun. But the thing that I do, speaking to how you answered the question in the first place, is I will, if it's a guy that really knows what the hell they're talking about, I will have that conversation with them. Like, hey, which have you found that this speaker sounds better than this one? Whatever. But I definitely do make a tech or the player play, and I know it's like probably bad for my ears, but I shove my ear down in there, even if it's loud as hell. If it's loud as hell, I stick my ear into all four of the speakers and listen to them on the outside of the cone, and then where we were talking about before, I listen to them where the dust cone is. I use my ear to find where the sweet spot is in that person's rig. Now, luckily, I don't do that every day. I only do that once, usually like rehearsals. But that's, to me, it's like I'm going to be placing a microphone somewhere. I need to hear where the best sounding sweet spot of that instrument is. So that's my thing. But cool, man. Well, hey, listen, we're about 45 minutes into this. We're a little bit running out of time here. Thanks a lot, dude. This is so much fun.
It's fun.
Yeah.
I got a million ideas.
I know,
even
right?
on guitar.
Oh my
mics. It's just
good. It's awesome. And this isn't just for you guys out there. I've learned tons today, or I learned, Chris said something today that I was like, oh, wow, I'm going to try that. Actually, that sounds really interesting. So we'll try to do a bunch more of these, maybe do one or two a week. For you guys, and let us know if you're enjoying them. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel and all of my social media and Chris's social media. Chris, what's your what do you have? Instagram and Facebook? What's your Instagram?
Instagram is Chris_Rabold, and that's Rabold. There's no Y in there. And then Facebook is just me, Chris Rabold.
Cool. We'll follow all that stuff. I'll give you a splash screen at the end here that shows all my social media. Go ahead and follow. If you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you'll get a notification that these videos, whenever I post them. So we'll do some more of this. Thanks a lot, Chris. I really appreciate it, man. All right.
Awesome, dude. Thank you.
Take care.